Welcome everybody to another episode of Lonely Wrist. Today, a very special guest, Mr. Lewis Heath from AnOrdain and Paulin Watches. What's up, Lewis?
Thanks, Blake. Nice to be here.
Yeah,
Although I'm not in Vegas. I'm not in Vegas, I should say. I'm in the Highlands.
it looks like you're in a cabin somewhere right
I'm in
now.
a sauna actually. It was the kids are in the house. Obviously, the kids live in the house as well. But they
Sure.
it's 8 o'clock in the evening, and they're all just messing around and making a noise. So I came up here. So I'm in a little
Just a
see
good.
the
Oh yeah,
just
that's a
it's
good
a
little
nice
spot.
springtime here.
Hopefully, you're not
Yeah,
cooking
it's
in
not
there
very.
right now.
No fire on, so we're good. Yeah.
So let's start in. This is going to be a challenging one for us because I've never done like two brands at one time.
Ah, yes. Yeah.
Um, so this is going to be particularly challenging. Let's start with AnOrdain. Tell us about the
Mhm.
brand. Tell us how you got to where you are today. Obviously, a lot of people have probably been asking how the name came to be. Um,
Yeah, sure.
that's-
Yeah. No, well, that's a good place to start, I suppose. So, a long time before I was interested in watches, I think I just finished school, and I came up for a holiday to this place in the Highlands that I used to go with my family a lot. And I always loved this place. It was very peaceful, but no one really lives up. Well, I say no one lives up in the Highlands. I live in the Highlands now, and if but it's not somewhere that'd be easy to find work. You could either some fishing, a bit of farming, stuff like that. And I got thinking, what could you do here that would give you a living and be interesting to do? And for some reason, I thought watchmaking would be good. Um, and the thought kind of stayed with me for the next 15, 20 years, something like that. And the place I was at anyway was a little lochan. Where a lochan is a loch is a lake, and a lochan is a small lake in kind of Scottish uh, sort of language. Is it? Yeah. Anyway, the lochan was called AnOrdain, and it's not only that, but it's probably the only name that I can remember from all the little lochans. They have very strange Gaelic names, and it's yeah. So it always stuck with me, and that's kind of it was the idea I was saving for when I knew a little bit more about what I was doing. So I did before this. I had another business that was designing products, and so I learned a bit about business in my kind of 20s and early 30s, and then I felt like this was kind of the right time to do it. So in about 2013, 14, I started looking at what we could make. And the idea, it wasn't initially about enamel. The idea was because my wife and I had gone to Baselworld in I think 2013, and she was interested in the Paulin aspect of it, which was much more about being kind of a design high street kind of affordable brand. And I was much more interested in the kind of manufacturing and design and the kind of craft aspect. And we went into in these days. A, you had Baselworld, and B, Baselworld had manufacturing halls. So you'd go in, and you just have these little cubicles. You pop in, and what amazed me very quickly was how all the parts for a watch were made. So a watch factory doesn't make watches; it assembles watches, and
right.
the cases are made by a case factory, the dials are made by a dial factory. And so you have a handful of factories that make dials, a handful that make hands, cases. So what you end up with is a fairly similar palette to work with. And so we'd gone through all the different manufacturers and realized that you could kind of do the same things with any of them. Um, and so that got me thinking, and so we came back to the UK, and I thought, well, could we turn people's skills to making watches here? So could you get a CNC machinist to make a case, or a leather worker or a belt maker to make a strap, and that kind of thing? And I was very naive at the time, and I thought that'd be simple, it'd be easy to do. And I think it wasted about 2 years trying to get that all going, and it didn't at all, because I mean, people, the tolerances are so far from what anyone else works with, that it's just a disaster. But the one thing that came out of it was a dial bit, which was which had kind of started looking at coins and gone to Birmingham to some of the mints there. And there was one coin that it's a commemorative coin with enamel on it, and it was just this really vivid red poppy. And I was just very taken with that. And I thought, well, I know they use enamel in dials, so maybe we could try that. So initially we tried with a manufacturer in Birmingham to make the dials, and it was just as I said with the other people, it was just they were just not kind of up to tolerance. So so in about 2014ish, I put an advert at the art school, and we had one person apply for the job, and that was Adam. And luckily, luckily we had one. Yeah, and he spent the next 3 years just working out to make a dial, basically, and then that took us up to 2018 when we launched, and yeah, that was 2018. And looking back on it, we didn't really like it was. We've learned an awful lot since then, and I think yeah, it's been a pretty steep learning curve for the past however many years. We're now, I think, since then we've gone through. We're about to move into our 5th building. We keep kind of outgrowing them and realizing we need different things that you can't fit in the current building. I think it's about 26 people now, and we are training people, which is really nice, because when we started, we were just no one knew what they were doing. We tried to work out how to do things, but now it's kind of we've got knowledge ourselves, and we're able to kind of pass it on and learn more and things like that. So it's really nice. It's like it's grown into a very nice space, I think, for to yeah, that's it.
I mean, you guys are absolutely crushing it. When I was in San Francisco, I mean, I got to see like the piece of ash that you used for the Model 3. And
Yeah,
you get to like they had a table. It was just a huge piece of it, and you just got to run your hand. I mean, at least I did. I don't know if I was allowed to, but
you're allowed
I
to.
ran my head across it, and
Yeah.
I was like, man, this is crazy. And so it sounds.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just gonna you carry on, Blake. So I was gonna blabber on about
It
that.
it, it sounds like for you the design language and the DNA started from the dial kind of outwards, it seems like, and you just wanted
Yeah.
to create beautiful tapestry or art or I mean, and then just work out, right? So
Yeah, I mean, the dials proved to be where we've been able to do things, initially. But it's really kind of experimenting and bringing different disciplines and ideas together, which is where I think we will kind of find enjoyment in what we do. And I mean, the piece of wood that you're talking about, that came very early on. I think it was actually a year after we launched, but it just took an awfully long time to get it out. That was when you look at old enamel, you'll see transparent enamel, and underneath there'll be these sort of engine turned patterns and these lovely engravings. And the reason they did that was that when you move the piece, then the light bounces off the metal, the different angles of the metal underneath the enamel, and creates these lovely, sort of patterns of light. And I really kind of respect these old crafts like the engine turnings, but it's not an aesthetic that I particularly like myself. And I thought, well, if we're doing things now, yeah, it's certainly it's very classical.
yeah, for sure.
And we wanted to do something that used that idea, the idea of playing with light and playing with surfaces, but was hadn't been done before or was just different. And yeah, there was there's this really brilliant design kind of making studio in not far from us, who do a lot of kind of boxes for high-end watches and whiskey and stuff like that. And they developed the surface from chiseling it out. And so we scanned it with a light scanner, and we shrunk it down, and then created a stamp with a laser, then pressed that into silver to replicate the pattern much smaller scale and then enameled over the top of it. So
Wow.
very simple to explain, but it took bloody ages to do. And it actually seems weird that it's now launched because I'm so used to it not, having just being one of these things that's in the studio, but we haven't managed to get out. But it's it's nice to see.
I think everybody loves you for it now that it's out and it's you know relatively available.
Yeah, it's relatively famous. I know it's another issue. But I think on the waiting list front, people seem to be more kind of. I think we kind of got a lot of stick for it at the beginning, and then people have realised that it is a fair way of doing it. We're not kind of. You can't buy one unless you've got to get in the line, you've got to get in the queue, kind of thing. And if you're prepared to wait, then you get them, and they're the pricing I think is reasonable, and it's not like we're not doing lotteries, and we're not kind of selling to people that we like the most or whatever. It's just so yeah, the availability is a tricky one, definitely, but it's just kind of nature of making things
I have
slowly.
I have a few of my friends that are on the waiting list, and I guess my take on it, I just can't. I don't know. I just can't wait that long.
It's a
I
long time to wait,
guess.
isn't it? I know, I know.
Yeah.
I'm seriously impressed at people that have that kind of patience. Actually, I think it's impressive. But the good thing about it is that by the time you get to your slot, there will be other things that have come into the world on available. So you're not waiting on a watch. You're waiting on a build slot. So whatever's there at the time, you can choose. So there are going to be some pretty weird and wonderful things coming up in the next few
That's
years. So it's
that's kind of
um,
a better way to put it out there into the world. You're just essentially reserving the labor, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what it is. It's not because no one is going to like the same watch they like today in 5 years' time. Well,
Exactly.
they might do, but not. The chances are. So, um, so yeah, it's. I think it's a nice way of doing it.
Let's pivot and talk about the sister brand Paulin, which I
Hmm.
think, if I'm not mistaken, is owned by your wife. Did I
Not
read that right?
anymore. We bought it off
Okay.
them. So no, it's
Oh,
teasing.
okay.
It was
So owned by
it
you.
was it's now all out. It's kind of so we've done this collaboration, I think, or one of these with them, and it'd been really fun for us because we've been able to. One of the things I really like about not just watch design but design in general is I think if you can be clever with design, you can make a product that's better for less money. Like you can make a better product and it will cost less to make. But, so I think with watches, a lot of the time people are kind of rolling them in glitter and making them, adding diamonds and gold and all this stuff, and that can be great sometimes. But I I think we sort of lose track of the fact that most people don't have huge amounts of money to buy, the kind of brands that we read about all the time. So, and even with AnOrdain, we're certainly in, we're sort of several £1,000s a piece. So when you talk to normal people, they're like, "I like your watches," then they realize how much they are, and they're like, oh, that's not a swatch kind of thing. So for us, it was a really fun kind of design brief to be able to create something that we would wear that was like, as a watch enthusiast, it was it had interest and it had character, but didn't, was under £1,000. I think is the sort of ceiling we've set ourselves with the brand. And then when my wife and his sister were kind of got to a stage where it was just after COVID and the shops had kind of no longer profitable, and they were, they had families and changing life priorities basically, and they weren't sure what to do with it. It seemed like it made a lot of sense for us to take it on because we'd already been doing the assembly for a lot of the watches, and yeah, just made sense. So it kind of worked for both.
Wow. Yeah, I'm actually a huge fan of what you're doing at Paulin, myself. And I mean, obviously, of course, an AnOrdain fan, but something about Paulin that I think a lot of watch brands don't capture. And I mean, you kind of, alluded to Swatch, so I'm going to use that as a
Yeah,
as
yeah.
a leaping stone. But brands like Swatch have fun with watchmaking.
Fun is it,
You
isn't it?
know,
I completely agree. Yeah, yeah.
and
I
obviously
think
brands
Nomos
like
are quite good
Paulin.
for that as well. Actually, I have to say, in my early days of, I remember they did their waterproof watch was for swimming. It wasn't for diving, and I loved that they could kind of have a bit of fun with, it doesn't go 1,000 meters under water. It's for the swimming pool, which is what you use it
Yeah,
for. So
and yeah, I mean, just
yeah.
taking some unique aspects. And so this watch that I'm wearing is one of yours, and it's not mine. This is a loaner. So,
That's all right.
um,
That's a
but
36,
something
isn't it? You got
it's yeah
the
it's
yeah. It's nice.
it's the
Yeah.
Module A quartz,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm.
something that's like a little Easter egg is when you look down and it lines up with like one of the minute markers, and you can see through the minute
Yeah.
marker. I'm like, dude, that's so fucking good. Like that is
Yeah.
such a little Easter egg that it makes me want to look down at the watch more often, which I normally don't do
That's good.
for some of my other higher end stuff. And then just having like I mean, you have the option, right, to do like a solid case back or crystal, sapphire crystal
Yeah.
or whatever. Um, and just that kind of like parody aspect of having like a sapphire crystal on a quartz watch.
Yeah, but I
It's
mean, but
like,
that movement, I mean, that's a very fun movement, isn't it?
yeah,
It's the what was it 905
nine five
something?
five dot 112.
That's that's the one. I think it is.
Yeah,
I did know that for many years when we are trying to find the things, but yeah, I mean, it's a great looking thing. I don't think Etta make quartz movements. Well, they don't make quartz movements like that fun anymore. But yeah, we have a stock of them, and they're just so cool to look at. Though it's just kind of fun because I think it's more interesting to look at that splattering of like gold and blue circuit boards and whatever else is back there than it is looking at a bog standard automatic movement. It's something very sci-fi about it. I find now. But
that's
yeah, there's that, and there's also in that the other option has the 7001 in, which is
yeah.
another movement that which I'm always liked a lot. I think it's so sort of thin and simple. It's nice one. So
The
yeah,
the case
you've got the options there.
and the case is beautiful. Like this, like Tonu, like modular, like case, like with the gaskets that wrap around to the crown. Like, I mean,
Mm.
it's just a
It's
super unique watch.
It's fine. You know what? It's interesting because I think the way that we started going at projects, approaching them, is not saying we want to make a diving watch, we want to make a sports watch. It's saying here's the problem, and the problem with this watch is that I think we had 200 movements that were new old stock, and we had to make 500 cases. So we thought, well, we're going to have 300 cases we can't use. So the idea of it was that you had an internal case that you could fit this movement into, and then you could swap that part out with the second internal, and then the rest of the cases would be kind of universal, if that makes sense. So we ended up making, say, 200 for the quartz and 300 for the mechanical, and that's where so if you take the black part out, the PVD black internal part of the case, you can screw that out, the four screws that come in the side, and it's completely waterproof. So you take that bit out, and then you've just got a frame, the stainless steel frame, and then you could slot in, say, the equivalent for the different dial or whatever. I mean, it's
I'm
more of a it's a manufacturing thing rather than you're not advised to do that at home because
right.
it's
I'm
fiddly.
curious
But
as to how this design like came to be, because I mean, this, in my opinion, is one of the more unique like approaches to watch
mm.
case design. Um, so like, where did that start from? Like, how did that come
Well,
to
it was
be?
it was really trying to answer that question of how do we not waste, like, if we can't get any more of these movements, how can we use the rest of these cases that we're going to have to order? So it's this idea of having a modular case that you could swap in different movements. So normally if you made a case, you couldn't put one movement in and then take it out and put a different size of movement in, because the alignment would be off and the sizes and stuff. So it was like a two-part modular case, and so the internal part is bespoke to that movement, and the outside is kind of not bespoke. So it was just working out ways to do this. So the screws coming in from the side is a kind of solution for that. And it kind of created a form. The creating a problem to start with to solve gave you a brief that kind of constrained you into making a probably a more interesting case than we would have had if we'd not had that kind of constraint.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely adore it. It's
I'm glad.
that, and then the Easter egg with the minute
Mm,
markers. I mean, and how thin it is. I mean, it's comfortable. Like
yeah. The
it's
bigger one is
the
nice.
40.
There's a
Yeah,
39, 40
39,
one.
40 or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's because with all watches, I mean, if you take the thickness and you make it fairly narrow, because then the proportions change. But once you stretch it out to 39, 39 and a half, I think it is, it gets slimmer again proportionally. So then, but to get it to work at that size is I think it was really good. The
I I got to try one on in San Francisco, the Note 40, because this had came in, and
mm,
at the time I've had this way too long. I'm sorry.
sorry.
I probably won't send it back to you, so don't kill me.
So okay, if you're
But
enjoying it, then it's all right.
but no, jokes aside, the 40 it came out, and then I was like, well, shit, this would have been good to do. Like, I've noticed on my YouTube that people like to see, like, here's like what you get as you
Mm,
tier up, or like to
mhm,
showcase, right? To showcase, like, an assortment of watches. And I was like, well, shit, it would have been nice to have the 40 to show, or like, maybe one of the like the module B's or something, like with like the manual or whatever.
mhm,
Um, but anyways, then the Oh No, I think that's what it's called, Oh No, came
mhm.
out, and then I was like, well, shit, like this one is so fun, so unique. By the time people are listening to this, we featured it on our best of wind up San Francisco,
Nice.
so you got that plaque, right? We featured this one on the best of Intersect, which was another good one.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so I just love, I love how playful it is. And then the 40 is a bit more wrist presence, but to me, I just love it. And
Mm.
let's try bouncing back. So we're just gonna keep this format going, see if we can. I'm just gonna
Yeah.
throw a bunch of curveballs
Okay.
at you, and let's step back to AnOrdain and design production. What drives design at AnOrdain?
That's an interesting question. I think so. I think with Paulin, it's very much kind of the graphics, and as you're saying, the Easter egg with the it's about the design and thinking about how you can be fun and playful. And I guess it sort of originates on a computer or a sketch pad, but with AnOrdain, it's much more about experimenting in the workshop. So in the enameling studios, initially when we started, right at the beginning, we had designed, because one of the kind of founders is Imogen, who's a typographer, and she very much drove the design at the beginning, which was around maps, typefaces, derived from those maps, and there's a very clear aesthetic from there. But as we've gone on, it's much more about what's coming out of the enameling studios and the kind of experiments and the sort of a lot of the accidents that happen. You get these really interesting kind of results, and so the watches are often based around those discoveries, and then Imogen's work with the typography comes to kind of complement it. So it's very much kind of workshop based, the design there. I think so. I mean, it's weird because we've got so much stuff that's been happening that isn't out there, that I think when people look at what we do, it's probably very different to what I think of when I kind of see what we do, because there's a large body that's not come out yet. But the kind of experimentation has gone into other areas of, most notably the movement, and the case as well. So there's a lot of very interesting things coming out in the next couple of years using, interesting ideas that have been realized in the movement and the case, as well as the enamel and the dial. So one thing that I'm going to say, but by the time this podcast comes out, you might not still have got out, and I will probably regret it slightly then and be told off for it in the studio.
It's like a hangover once you listen to it.
Yes. One of the other things that we've been experimenting with for quite a while now is porcelain. And porcelain's a really interesting material because a lot of people understandably get confused between porcelain and enamel. So porcelain is clay essentially that's fired, and enamel is glass, melted glass on metal. But porcelain also gets confused with ceramic. That's another thing I should say, is that when people look at ceramic tiles, what you're looking at there in the majority of cases, all the cases I know of, is a very hard material, normally called zirconia, which is what you make watch cases out of if they're ceramic, or you make teeth out of for kind of false teeth. And you buy that in a sheet form and you mill it out so you get your disc, and that's kind of your dial. But what we're doing is kind of casting circles from what you think of as pottery, and then finding ways to fire them and keep them kind of the surface flat and glossy. So what we've come out with is really lovely sort of luster on these glossy dials, and they've got a character of their own. They're not they're similar looking to enamel, but they're not. It's they have different properties. So that's something that we're going to be bringing out in the next, hopefully, early to midsummer, or previewing at least to that stage. And one of the really nice things about that is that process of porcelain making is very, very hard. Actually, you think of porcelain as something that a teapot's going to smash. It's actually really quite tough if you fire it to these like 1500 degrees centigrade. But it lends itself slightly to batch production. So we could make, maybe 5 or 10 in the time it would take us to make 1 or 2 enamel dials. Like there are other challenges with failures in it, but it's something that we could potentially do at a slightly more affordable price, which is appealing. So I think a lot of people, because that's still, obviously I talked about that with Paulin, but with AnOrdain, it's still, and always has been, kind of a big driver is kind of giving people access to kind of affordability, I suppose. And so I think this could be really, really fun. Actually, this what we've got coming out with that. And that'd be the first thing that I think is going to be new for us. And yeah, so I'm hoping it'll be around the time of this podcast coming out. So
that'd be awesome. Let's talk about. So I again, you're gonna have to forgive my ignorance. I'm a watch guy. I'm not a craftsman, a tradesman. I don't know anything about. I know some of the materials, to a very rudimentary level. But something that I think about, especially when I think about enamel, and even porcelain, right? Like over time, like porcelain pocket watches, they start to kind of patina. I don't know if that exists within the enamel space, but I'm curious to see what an AnOrdain watch would look like, 2 centuries from now.
Yeah, me too. I'll never see it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it's so. I mean, one of the kind of primary qualities of enamel is that it doesn't fade. So when you look at, the best way of explaining it, I think, is if you think of a stained glass window in a cathedral, in a 1,000-year-old church. Those have been sitting in the sunlight for the past 1,000 years, and they are still, richly coloured. And that's one of the qualities enamel has. I mean, it's essentially the same material, but it's on a kind of metal backing. So they shouldn't look any different in 200 years' time, I think is the answer. which is a pretty special thing, I
Yeah.
think.
Um, so obviously we're starting to get a grasp of enamel and some of your processes, but what would you say is the most challenging aspect of creating dials with enamel, and how have you as a brand overcame those challenges?
I think I think with I mean there's enameling in if you were to make one dial that's one color and a plain dial, and then there are more complex techniques, the cloisonné, choplave, and things like that. And they take another level of kind of time and training to get to. But what I'd say is definitely the most difficult thing is the finishing quality. So the difference, I think, between what's you can make one dial and you can kind of take a picture of it and it can look great in a photo or it can look great from a distance, but it's getting up close and looking at the dial under a loop and at different angles and different lights, and it being kind of passing muster on all those, and being able to do that, you know, time after time, and producing like that. And that, I think that's the great skill that the team here have developed, is having an incredibly high standard and being able to produce, because we've got um 8 enamelers and we're making 50 dials a month, which is, for 8 people, it isn't a huge amount, but it is, there are 50 dials that get into watches and pass QC, and that's every month. And so that's that's the tricky thing, I think, is getting to that standard and maintaining it, I would say.
How how many of the dials that you produce like actually get past? So like obviously like we've talked about quality here, and
Mm.
obviously you produce X and Y makes it through QC. Like what is the production to quality control ratio?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I think there's a lot of the perception about enamel comes from the way that the very simple white dials are manufactured. So if you look at a lot of the videos, you'll see kind of like a bread oven, and you'll see a dozen white dials coming in, and they'll set on fire, and then they'll come out. And if you produce in that method, you tend to get a very, very high failure rate, and that is very good for marketing, because I can say to you that 95% of the dials go in the bin, and so your dial is really special because it's one of
Right.
20. But that's the way of kind of almost mass producing enamel dials. Whereas when you're working in the way that we do, and this isn't because it's better or worse, it's just because this is the way we learned to do it, is that
Sure.
you have one enameler who works on one dial, and that's their sole focus. It's just this one dial. And so as a general rule, they'll be working to make one. It takes about 3 dials. So it's not, but they work until it's perfect, and they will kind of, if there are issues, they'll fix them. It's only when, with enamel, you can overwork it or you can take it too far, that you can't kind of fix those issues. So say 2 of the 3 dials will, won't make it, or they might get cracked when they're in the pad printing or something like that. So generally it's 1 in 3, but it is a very different way of working than the kind of bread tray with the big, dozen white dials on it. So
I'm assuming as you have this huge demand for your product right now, there's probably a thought that's crossed your mind like, oh shit, we you can take two paths, right? Like you can continue to do the slow, methodic, like quality, or you can be like, oh well shit, we got to ramp up, um and it sounds like you've taken like the first approach to say like, hey, we're just going to make sure we do this the right way. There you know, um I'm assuming there has been thoughts of ramping up production.
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my thoughts start with, oh shit, actually, like you're
Yeah.
saying, there's a lot of panic thoughts. But I mean, the first thing to say is probably we do have a lot of demand, but it's not, we sell, it's with 50 watches a month, it's 600 watches a year. If you look at any of the other, comparable watch brands or whatever, they're doing,
way more.
way more. Yeah, so it's not, it's a lot of demand, but it's relative to very low output, and yeah, I mean, we could ramp up production in the long term, but to train an enameler to the point where from they walk in as a as a graduate jeweler, as a trained jeweler, to becoming a fully fledged enameler who can produce on their own, you're talking probably 2 years, maybe 18 months, 2 years. Okay. And to get that person to the 2-year point, a properly fully fledged enameler has to be teaching them. So we started off with 1 enameler, then we moved to 3, and those 3 guys have been, they've kind of been the backbone of the business since then, and they've trained people. Now we're at the point where we're 8 people who are very competent, and I think you make decisions. We are going to train more people, and I think it's a really important thing to do. But it's a choice. Do we want to be creating interesting things and making sure what we do is spot on, or do we want to be trying to sell a lot of watches? And the interest for me, and I think for everyone else in the team, lies in creating new things and doing stuff we're kind of proud of. So
That
yes, not much good for the waiting list, but yeah.
that's something that nobody really talks about. Like, you have a fixed amount of resources, whether it's money, capital, labor, whatever, right? Like, here's the amount of it that's going into your production, right? Your Model 2, your Model 1, Model 3. And then you're like, this is the percentage of that that's going into like R&D, like research development, like future future innovation, like it just something nobody talks about that.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I mean, we've had a kind of 20% rule that's we've not always been able to maintain, but the idea is that you'll 20% of the time be working on a project that's not commercial, which A, keeps people interested, and B, produces some really interesting outputs. So that's always been part of the kind of setup. But I mean, we had issues with materials at the end of last year, and we got quite behind on manufacturing. So everyone's had to ditch that kind of playtime, if you like, of having kind of 20% working on their own projects for the past few months, and that's noticeably more stressful, I think, in the enameling studio, that everyone's just flat out on production. And it's good. It's a healthy balance to be doing R&D as well as manufacturing. Definitely.
I kind of want to talk briefly, and this may shift back to Paulin, maybe shift back to AnOrdain. I'll let you decide where to take it. But something that I've noticed with Paulin, for example, you guys are very transparent about like your supply chain. Like, you're like, hey, here's where the cases come from, here's where the dials come from, right? Whatever, right? The movements, so it doesn't seem like, and this is where we can spin it back to AnOrdain. But something I've also read about you guys is that you guys are trying to kind of get away from being so reliant on the supply chain for AnOrdain. Because I was reading an article that you guys are, I guess you guys had a bunch of little studios like around like Glasgow, and then you guys are trying to like bring them like in house or under one roof or whatever. And then, so I'm assuming in terms of your supply chain for enamel, has that been limiting you? Has that been crippling you? Like,
no, I mean, enamels. I mean, some interesting things with enamel. The health and safety aspect of it. There are some pretty toxic chemicals in enamel when it's in a kind of powder form. When it's in the watch, it's fine. But regulations over the years, really since the late 80s, have changed what you can put in enamel. and every different color of enamel from every different producer is a specific recipe. So there'll be, we did have a lot of problems a few years ago with kind of the main colors we were using no longer being available, and we didn't have stock of them. So that was a real problem. But generally, I mean, enamel isn't a hard one to kind of overcome, because you can, generally you can just stockpile it, which is what we've done. But in terms of the other, I mean, the other aspect. So the studios, the article you're reading was, at the moment we have 5 or 6 different spaces, from everything from kind of watchmaking to, hydraulic pressing of blanks and things like that. So they're sort of scattered around the place, because you can't fit a 500-ton press on the 4th floor, and all this kind of thing. So we bought a factory, or we bought a building about 18 months ago now, and we've been kind of refitting it into a factory. So in late summer, hopefully, we'll have a kind of purpose built watchmaking factory for the for exactly what we do. So there'll be a lot of the kind of engraving, enameling, the ceramics now, CNCs, things like that. So it'd be a really good opportunity to we'll get everything in the same place, which would be brilliant, and it'll allow us to take on some new aspects. So things like the cases, hands. I mean, we do some of the handwork ourselves, but some of it we get from Switzerland. So it's a mix at the moment. And so that's in the long term. There's some things aren't, aren't feasible to do if they're feasible, but it depends on, I suppose, the different aspects. So I think movement manufacture, for example, is something that people talked about a lot. A few years ago, it was all about in-house movements. And I think the reality of that, because I looked into it an awful lot, and it's really about scale. If you can produce, 10,000, 100,000 movements, then, it's worth doing. But if you're doing, a few hundred, a few thousand, it's, you're going to be charging your customer a huge amount more than you would be for the same movement, and if you were using an ETA or an LJP. So I think it's being pragmatic and saying what can we do that gives the customer like a better watch at a good price, because we can make a movement, and we've got a watchmaker who's just been working on designing modules and things like that, and over that period of time we've realized that this is fun and it's interesting, but it's not really commercially viable unless you want to be selling kind of Roger Smith type prices, which
well, not only that too, but then becomes like the bigger problem. I'm a huge fan of off the shelf calibers, because I think longevity plays a huge picture in watches. You sell and I have a Rolex story, right? I've got a Rolex from the 1960s, and I sent it back to Rolex to get serviced, and they were like, nope, not going to do it. Sorry.
Really?
Sent the watch back to me, but they, Rolex and other brands, they sell this dream that this is a watch that will be like pass through your family for generations. And here a watch is nearly 70 years old, and that's one lifetime, technically almost 2, and they won't service it.
What was it? Which model? Out of curiosity.
It was a 1601 Datejust.
Okay.
I mean, it's very common.
You'd have thought that would be.
They sold
fairly
millions
standard.
of those things. And they refused to service it for whatever. They gave me no reason. The watch just came back. They said, they rejected it. So going back to off the shelf calibers, like I don't mind them. Like I like being able. It's like like if you buy an expensive car and you have to have some like really special wrench to change the spark plugs or something, so you can only get that tool at the dealership or whatever, so you have to take your car to that dealership to get it served. It just seems stupid to me that this is your product, and you have the ability to take it anywhere. If something's wrong with my watch and I rely on my watch, like you should just be able to pop down to your corner friendly watchmaker and have it serviced.
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
I agree. Yeah.
and
I mean,
brands are exploiting that. You know, they're exploiting that system because here's and even going back to the boutique model, like we've talked about on some of the other brands and podcasts episodes, like we've talked about brands that are straying away from the multi-brand, the shop and shop. You know,
mhm,
every brand wants to take back their customer, and that's the way that they do it. So that's the reason why they spend millions and millions of dollars developing these in-house calibers, because then they own the customer for the long term. But
mhm,
if I buy your watch from XYZ jeweler,
mhm.
I'm not an AnOrdain customer. I'm an XYZ jeweler customer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so they realize that, and and that's the reason why the people that do follow the like multi-brand shop and shop model, they're like, oh, register your watch with us, and we'll extend your warranty 5 years or 2 years,
Yeah.
because then they're becoming that customer back of the brand, which is a
Mhm.
weird, silly thing to say. Um, but going back to your brand and Ordain, like it just seems like it would be silly with the amount of I guess aesthetic developments that you guys are doing to even consider that. To so I think you're going in the right direction by not
It would
doing it.
just, yeah, I think when the kind of conclusion I came to looking at movements and development a few years ago was that you have the kind of reliability and the value with off the shelf, but what you're missing is the aesthetics of having a beautifully finished movement. So the idea that we've had is to try and kind of have the best of both worlds, to take a stock movement and apply finishing to it in a way that makes it more interesting to look at and more pleasing. So that stuff we'll bring out in the next year or so, hopefully.
Lo-
So there are things we can improve, but I definitely think if you start making your own movements, then you're going to be adding a lot to the price.
right. Let's pivot again. You talked about porcelain. Is there any other materials that you guys have been experimenting with, like that you guys are? I mean, obviously you don't have to put the cat before
Yeah.
let the cat out of the bag, but I mean, I'm sure there's more traditional materials out there that people aren't using that have excited you, that like you guys are in the lab with, or
We do, yeah. I mean, we've used a lot of. I mean, engraving is a big thing that we've got into the past couple of years, and we've got Cara is one of the enamelers is also kind of her specialty is hand engraving. Um, so there's that, and with engraving comes things like filling, like inking. So if you remember I don't remember. Look at old grandfather clocks, and they've got these normally kind of German silver dials with the black. So that's a kind of a wax that you'd put into the silver. So things like that have been interesting. We've not got anything. I think everything at the moment coming through from AnOrdain is enamel. I think Paulin's certainly more experimental in that respect. I mean, we did the anodized aluminium dials, which was really a lot more difficult than we thought it was going to be which is why you generally don't see them. Getting consistent finish is a nightmare. So they were actually for a very affordable watch. They're incredibly limited batches of, wasn't by design. So yeah, I think Paulin's definitely one for playing with materials in that respect. But yeah, there's always, we kind of always keep an open mind for what we could use, I think.
I kind of want to there's probably at one point when you guys were working on something and you kind of realized there was like a oh shit moment, like maybe you mix this
A
or
good oh
mix
shit or
that
bad.
wrong. Yeah, oh good oh shit,
I guess,
or
yeah.
maybe bad, whichever one. But I
The
mean,
fume was that. I mean, that was very much where the fume, because we stumbled upon the way of making an enamel fume dial. I mean, there was no kind of fume enamel before this, and it was just because we swapped from using copper to using silver as a base metal, and one of the dials just warped in the middle, like it kind of rose up, and because there was less enamel covering the top and more at the sides, it went from being light on the top to dark on the sides. It looked amazing. So we were like, we've got to work out how to do that and make it flat, and that's 2 years later it came out. So yeah, that's there are these are definitely the good bits, is when things go wrong in a good way in the studio. That's why, yeah, I love.
Yeah, and it seems like so. Let's walk through the collection. You have the Model One, Model Two, Model Three. The Model One was the first to release. Is that?
Yeah, Model One was
Um,
first. Yeah, no, we've done it in kind of in that order, one, two, three.
yeah.
So Model One is, it was our first watch. It's kind of sort of everyday sort of dress watch almost. The Model Two is a more fieldy kind of slightly more rugged outdoors watch, and that's the way we're taking the porcelain. That'll be going down that route of, it, the lovely thing about the porcelain, I was trying to not explain very well before, is that you have this. The dials have a real character. They have a character that I associate with vintage watches, in that you'd get over 70 years of wear and fading, and it's not a perfect dial, but it's just a huge appeal about it, and it doesn't look like anyone else's watch. It doesn't look like it came off a factory line. It's got real character, and I think to get a new watch with that kind of character is just a really rare thing. So the porcelain going into the Model 2, I think it's gonna be really exciting, because when you think of AnOrdain, you don't really think of kind of field or sports watches, but I think this is going to be be an interesting interesting watch. And then the Model 3 is the kind of the basis for more experimental things with textures. We had the sunburst that we did with the Dinky with that first, the method. It's really playing around with enameling, different techniques there.
Yeah, I think I mean the Model 3 is probably, in my opinion, like the most beautiful. Like the Model 3 licking
Lichen, yeah,
whatever.
yeah. No, that's right.
I
It
think
probably is lichen in some countries, but yeah, it's
I
just.
don't know. Again,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean it's a stunning watch, and that's the one to me that like sticks out like the
I'm
most
glad,
in
because
terms of
if you'd said the earliest one, then we'd be going the wrong way. So I think
yeah.
that was one of our most recent. So that's appreciate
We
that.
we have I also have a watch club here in Vegas, and we've got almost 100
Yeah.
members now. And one of our collectors, I think he has 4 or 5 of your watches.
No way. Can you say who? Well, you can tell me after who it is. I'll probably
Yeah, I'll
know who
tell
it
you
is.
after.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean he's so like everybody else is like, oh man, AnOrdain, like like, and then he's the one that's like, oh yeah, you want to see some? I got you, man. So he's got a little like his little showcase of your brand.
That's so
Every time
cool.
it comes to some of the watch clubs, and
We
and
should get, when we
if it
open the
wasn't for
factory, you come over. That's pretty cool. I
yeah
didn't know
yeah
we had
we're
anyone down there.
he's yeah I need to circle back. I know he's got I think at a minimum 3, but I think he has a
Yeah,
build slot
that's
for
cool.
4 or 5, one of the two. And I'll say his name
Nice.
after we stop the recording. Um, let's circle back here.
Actually, my battery is saying it's red, and I don't have a
Yeah,
charger in this sauna, I'm afraid. So in case I get cut,
yeah.
that's very
Well,
unprofessional there.
we're coming up on an hour. This has been nearly an epic podcast, and there was a lot of questions that were kind of addressed pretty quickly.
Mm.
Where do you see the brand heading in the next 10 years or decade?
That's yeah. More training. Not necessarily a lot more people. I don't want to get too much bigger, but I want to be just developing new techniques, bringing more in house, not for the sake of bringing more in house, but just so that we have more control over experimenting with different aspects of watchmaking. So yeah, just continuing, and I think it'll probably go quite quickly, because
And
I think yeah.
what has been the most rewarding part of owning a watch brand? This can be Paulin, AnOrdain, whatever.
I particularly love being in the studio and seeing what is produced by the teams, and just going in and seeing what people are doing. And it's lovely. One of the original enamelers was crowned Precious Metal Worker of the Year in the UK last year, and that was for her work in AnOrdain, and that was really special. I think having kind of realizing that she's beaten everyone else at making precious metals, so that was very cool. It's just being seeing a team that's become very good at what they do, and I'm very proud of that. So I exclude myself from that, by the way. I can't enamel for shit. I like watching them doing it.
Well, let's let's leave you on that. I don't want to take up too much of your time. We're approaching an hour here. Conservative your
Thanks,
battery. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been amazing. We'll have to have you back here in the future, and we'll do like a 2.0, and
cool.
we'll have to revisit.
No.
Yeah, do that, and we will absolutely see you here on the next one.
Thanks, mate. Very nice talking to you.
Bye.
Cool. Take care.
Bye.